Good evening, everyone. The meeting is called back to order at 7:12 p.m. The clerk will now lead us in the pledge. If the clerk is there. All right, I will lead us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation,
under
God,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you.
All Sharon.
All right. I just lost my place. Okay, here we go. May I have a motion and a second that the agenda of April 21st, 2020 be approved as submitted?
So moved. Second.
Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor, please raise your hand. I'm assuming there are none opposed. I cannot see everybody. Okay.
They were all in favor, none opposed.
Okay, thanks, Sharon. Can you see everybody? Sharon?
Yes, I can.
Okay, all right, then I'm going, because I can't, so I'm going to assume that you can see everybody and that I will just proceed on, and I'm not going to say whether or not it's all approved or not. Do you understand what I mean?
Okay, so I will finish with the motion carried.
Yes, please. That
Okay.
makes sense. Thank you. All right. May I have a motion and a second that the Board of Education approve the consent agenda as printed, as stated on your agenda?
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor?
All in favor, none opposed, motion carried.
Thank you. All right, we do not have a treasurer's report, so we are on to special reports. Tom?
Yes, we have a special report this evening. I'm going to share my screen just so I can introduce them. Do you see the Board of Education slide?
Yes.
All right, great. And our special report this evening is from Campus Construction, presented by Gary Huffman and Jared Miller. Gary may be having technical difficulties, so I'll turn to Jared Miller.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me again. Just wanted to go over the progress of the capital improvement project. Thus far, we have made great progress at 2 out of the 3 elementary schools, and with the plan of moving forward at Indian Landing later in the construction schedule. We'll start at Cobbles. We started off shovel in the ground on March 4th. Since that date, we have full foundations in place. The foundations were backfilled. We have a firewall, a masonry firewall built, and we will be seeing steel on site tomorrow, which is extremely promising given the environment we've been working in with COVID-19. There's certainly been challenges as far as labor availability, but given the access to the buildings under these unoccupied conditions has allowed us to catch up and in some areas get a little bit ahead to kind of absorb any of the unforeseen challenges down the road. So at Cobbles, we're doing really well. We have a lot of site work in place that I'm sure if anyone's driven by, it looks a little scary right now, but it'll get put back together pretty quickly here. Next, we started over at Scribner. So we initially had started with work at the classroom addition. We adjusted efforts to the back of the building to ensure that gymnasium space was ready for the beginning of school next year. Just in case we did run into any further delays as far as not being able to be on site. So we advanced that schedule significantly. We have a full foundation in place at that building as well. They started backfilling that today. They have fully excavated the cafeteria addition. So the back of Scribner is starting to look like something. It might be a little scary as well, but it's promising, and we're right on schedule there as well. So we're making lemonade out of lemons, and so far all the contractors have, in some way, have adjusted either means and methods, materials, just logistics in itself to make sure that we can get anything and everything completed that's available to us at this time. So all contractors so far are on board and moving forward. Lastly, but certainly not least, over at Indian Landing, we got a jump start on getting our temporary parking lot in over there. And with school being out until at least May 15th, we may be able to get after the underground storm chamber system. So that would be a huge advance in the schedule, as we weren't scheduled to be there until the end of the school year. So as unfortunate as it is that obviously people are not in the buildings, we're trying to make the best of that and get done everything we possibly can get done. Budgetarily, we're doing really well. We're tracking as we should. No major issues have come up thus far, and hopefully we stay clear of them throughout. With that, I will open it up to any questions.
Board members, any questions? And if you do have a question, will you speak up, because I can't see everybody? Okay, it appears there are no questions. Well, but it sounds like there's been a lot of progress. So Tom Putnam is the famous silver lining guy. So we found a couple silver linings there, and that's great. We appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, absolutely. And again, it's been extremely beneficial that the district's been so proactive with allowing us to get into these spaces as soon as we've been allowed to legally. So we really appreciate that on our end. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. And thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Kate,
Yes, Barb.
Kate,
Yep.
I do have a point to bring up.
Okay.
In that I want the public to know that the administration, Tom, made sure that, and Mark Sansucci made sure that we were essential. This project was essential construction, because when the governor shut things down, we weren't sure where we were going to be standing with that. So I think that's important to point out.
Thanks, Barb, and just for the community, all the projects we're working on are considered essential. They're following all the mandates from the state based on the executive order to make sure social distancing and safety is the top priority. And we appreciate campus construction, as well as our architects and all of the folks doing the labor for everything that they're doing to make sure that we're upholding that executive order from the governor based on Paul's law. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a lot of moving parts here because so much has changed from day to day and week to week. So trying to keep that organized and running smoothly has probably been a job all on its own, but it does seem like it's running, going along smoothly, a little ahead of schedule here and there. And that's wonderful. So we appreciate all the effort.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
That concludes special reports.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Putnam. All right. This is normally visitor speaking time, and because this is not normal times, I just want to remind the public of what's happening with contacting the board. The Board of Education meetings from March 16, 2020 forward until further notice shall be closed to the public under Governor Executive Order 202.1. Therefore, the board encourages residents to share their opinions, voice their concerns, and offer suggestions through written communication. We know that that's a deviation from our practice, and it's inconvenient sometimes, but these are challenging times, and we have to follow these executive orders. And so I just wanted to make that reminder to the public at large. And then we'll move on now to student representative report, which of course Levia Zhao has been excused from doing tonight. And so we'll move on. So Tom, it's superintendent's reports.
Great.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
All right. So I believe you can still see my shared screen. The superintendent's reports this evening. I just have a couple of student and staff honors to mention. I'll turn it over to Dr. Sansucci, who will talk about the land purchase update we started talking about at the last meeting in March. And then I have a brief COVID-19 update, and then I'll turn it back to Dr. Sansucci for our budget update. So for the viewing audience, that means that Dr. Sansucci and I will be taking turns sharing our screens, and stick with us for that fun attempt to do that. I'll start with student and staff honors. Just huge kudos to our robotics team. Team 1511 from the high school has been busy helping others during the quarantine. They've supplied meals, they've made 3D printed face shields, and held a fundraiser to help our local healthcare workers and businesses. Really incredible way to give back to the community. Kudos to this team. We know we hear and talk a lot about robotics, and really they're always looking for outreach. This is an incredible group of students, advisors, parent volunteers, corporate volunteers, and when you're in a crisis like we are nationally and globally, it's amazing to see these kids really step up and do incredible things for our community. So thank you. And the other update I have is coming. There you go. Is the Penfield Central School District has been named once again as the 2020 list of best communities for music by the NAMM Foundation. Sadly, a number of our events this year, like the Prism concert, have been canceled due to the school closures. I know that while we're not performing in the auditorium, and while students may not be getting together to do practicing, I will just give a shout out to our many incredible music teachers who are finding ways to still do lessons during these school closures through video platforms and encouraging students to keep practicing. And this is why, just one of the many reasons why we're one of the best communities for music. So congratulations to everybody that puts time in and works with our students to win this award. I'm now going to stop sharing my screen to allow Dr. Sansucci to share his for a land purchase update.
Thank you very much. I want to briefly update the board on two items that you'll be addressing later in your agenda. So both having to do with land purchase. Tonight on your agenda first is a land purchase agreement for property that we're proposing to buy for school district purposes for a bus garage and operations center, for our purposes of bus and buildings and grounds. I want to talk a little bit about that, and then I want to talk about the scope of that project, what some milestones will be, how we'll be proceeding, decisions that need to be made along the way, and just kind of bring the board and the community up to speed on the scope of the whole project. So first is the purchase of property. So the proposed site is on Jackson Road, 1365 Jackson Road. I think we all know it as Barry's Turkey Farm. And I think folks that have been paying attention to the long history of this project know that This was once part of a project once before. We moved fairly far down this road with a different portion of that property before we took it out of the project, moved ahead at that time with the elementary additions that we just talked about. We're now back to this again. Essentially, we are purchasing a larger portion of the property to allow for the placement of the building we intend to put, and also to allow for sewage, which turned into the problem the first time around. So at this point, we would have both frontage to Plank and Jackson Road. And the proposed sale price is $20,000 per acre for the approximately 40 acres. Is a total price of $802,000. That purchase price would be aidable up to our state aid ratio, which we're using an estimate for that of about 70%. So the state would reimburse us about 70 cents per dollar for that purchase price. The light green shaded area here is the piece of the property that we're proposing to.
You're not sharing your screen there right now.
Oh, I'm not. Okay. Let's see if we can fix that. Is that better?
Yeah, you've got it now.
I apologize. So the portion of the parcel that we were intending, that we intend to purchase is the light green shared portion of this slide. 47, the entire existing parcels, about 47 acres. The owner intends to retain 7 acres in the lower left-hand corner. We would purchase the left. So you can see we'd have access to both Jackson and Plank Road. And again, the purchase of that is $802,000 or about $20,000 an acre. That's the land purchase. And if you this slide shows the entire what we intend ultimately to be an entire capital project. So in 2 components. The first component would be the transportation buildings and grounds facility, that operations center. That involves the purchase of land, the construction of a building on the site for the purposes of transportation and buildings and grounds, moving those existing services off a 5 Mile Line Road and then onto this property at Plank. We would then renovate the existing bus garage, moving the IT out of the existing, out of its spaces at the high school, information technology, to provide a central space for them along with some storage. We would include a bus wash in the existing building, and we would also plan on renovating part of it as a waiting room and so on, and a small bus garage, a small routing station, I guess I would say, because we wouldn't entirely abandon routing out of that facility. So some buses would still run out of there. The high school's on 5 Mile Line Road, but the majority of our operations, bus repair and so forth, would be on the Jackson Road site. So that's portion 1, if you will. The second portion of the project, as we're putting it together, is we're considering items from our building condition survey. So these are items of upkeep, if you will, items that need to be completed. When you have as many square footage of building as Penfield does, sort of just like your home, maintenance is an ongoing concern. So we have a number of items that we are in review of the facilities committee. So I'll come to that in just a minute. The basic steps of the land purchase are here. We have been negotiating the purchase price, and tonight on the agenda is approval of that purchase offer. That's in red. That doesn't authorize the purchase of the property necessarily. The voter has ultimate authority to make that decision. So what we're doing tonight really is starting a process, and the board, by approving that purchase offer, is committing to start that process. We'd undertake and complete an environmental review. Once that environmental review is complete, we would schedule a vote. The school district voters would need to approve it and positively for us to move forward. And then ultimately it would need to be approved by the state education department. So tonight, again, as I said, is the approval of the purchase offer, which starts this process. And then also a request, there's a seeker item on the agenda whereby the board would indicate that they would like to be the lead agent they would like to be in charge of that seeker review. As a step in that process, the board needs to declare that intent. And then survey other interested parties to see if anyone else might be interested in being lead agent. If not, we'll move forward. So this is a process. We expect that it'll take fully a year, and I'll cover that in a little more detail as we move through this presentation. So this is the phase one of that, or not phase one, but component one, the transportation buildings and grounds facility. Just a restatement of what it is we intend. Our current estimated cost of that, including the $800,000 purchase of the property, is about $32 million in total. That's an estimate at this point. We haven't refined it. We'll continue to do so as we move through with the facilities committee, with the board, and with the public over the course of the next many months. We'll be having lots of conversations about that. As we include things, don't include things, consider, make changes, and so forth. But for right now, and as you face approval of that purchase offer, we wanted to give the public and the board our best estimate of where we're at right now in that regard. So about $32.5 million. The other component of the project, that second component of the project, are the building condition survey items. And that's sort of a little bit of a term of art. So we thought we'd give some examples. So these are the sorts of items that we're considering. So window replacement at Harris Hill, cabinets and countertops at Cobbles, they're delaminating. You've seen a presentation in the past from Mr. McNiff about their condition. Various pieces of roofing that have reached the ends of their life, some security enhancements such as secure vestibules. So we have quite a list of those of needs, of wants, and of nice to haves. The facilities committee has been doing work to prioritize those building condition survey items. Right now, the priority ones, the more immediate needs, are total about $17 million. Priority twos, which are the needs, but there's probably more time and some additional thought that needs to be given to those, about $6 million, and $14 million worth of nice to haves. This prioritization is no guarantee that any of those will end up ultimately in the project, but it's just a part of this process as we consider moving forward with a capital project, what we should include, what should be included, what needs to be included. Certainly in a project like this, because it's being driven by that purchase of property and by the operations center, that phase one component will certainly be in the project. And we're considering what other items might make sense as we move along. Some priority one examples and just a sense of scope as to what they might compose. At the high school, roof is quite large, and it's been re-roofed through the years in segments as various pieces have been constructed. So partial roof replacement for the pieces that have reached their end of life is about $3 million. Secured vestibules at the high school, about $500,000. As you know, right now, there's really, once you're into the building, you're in the building. There's no real way to hold folks in a secure area while they're bedded and as they attain entrance to the building. Again, roof replacement at Cobbles. IFAS, that's that external fiberglass insulation system at Scribner. It needs repair. It's beyond what we can do in-house. Window replacement at Harris Hill. So you get a sense kind of these are not necessarily the sexiest, most exciting kinds of items, but they are the sort of items we need to attend to as we move through the lifespan of the building, really. The priorities of the project, As you know, we've had a long history of using cash to finance projects. We've maintained a positive local share. And we intend, that is to say, our state aid on these projects exceeds the expense. So we've been able to offer projects at minimal or no cost to the taxpayer. We intend to continue that as we develop this project. So our goal is to maximize state aid, to put the project together in such a way that we take advantage of all state aid available and are able to manage the costs of the project so that the state pays up to what we're entitled to. We intend to finance our local share. That's the share that the state won't finance with reserves and with state aid. We want to be able to provide adequate transportation and buildings and grounds facilities. This has been a top priority item for many, many, many years. And we now have an opportunity to move forward on that. And we also want to be able to address some of our highest priority needs. In terms of milestone and a milestone schedule, tonight kicks that off. So the board approves, if you choose to approve the purchase offer with Mr. Berry, we'll also need to adopt that resolution of intent to be lead agency. That starts the seeker process. And really that becomes sort of the schedule that drives this process. We have decisions, we have choices we have to make. There's conversations we have to have with the public, but the schedule is really going to be driven by the deadlines and by the needs of that seeker process. So you can see here that we would propose after tonight to update the board on project development at board meetings as we move along. We will review scope estimates and financial plan at continuing and ongoing facilities committee meetings. But about a month from now, at May 26th, if other agencies have agreed that it makes the most sense for Penfield to be lead agency, then you would adopt a resolution at that meeting declaring yourself lead agency. At that point, we would start talking about, let's have a public meeting. When does it make sense to have that meeting, and what does that schedule look like? Right now, we believe that would make the most sense sometime in September. We know that summer's coming up fast and folks don't necessarily pay attention to us, and rightfully so during that month. So, so early in September or mid-September, we should say, get school open and then ask for folks to attend a meeting to discuss the project. Continue discussions through October and November, and really, if the seeker work going on behind the scenes in terms of environmental review, traffic studies, the other kinds of work that needs to be done for the board to make a solid determination as to environmental impact, we should be ready by December, by the December meeting, to approve the project and set a date for public referendum. So really, I think based on this schedule, the earliest that could be would be sometime in February of 21. So it's a process. We're starting it tonight. We propose to start it tonight. But as you can see, there's much to be done, and there'll be lots of further conversation. Next step, the Facilities Committee at its next meeting is going to continue review. We've submitted that preliminary prioritization of the VCS items to Bernie Donegan, our financial advisor, and he'll be evaluating those in regard to our financial goals. Can we offer a project that includes these items at meeting our goals for the taxpayer? Does it make sense? Do certain items help us or hurt us in terms of our financial planning? What does that look like? And we'll continue to refine those conceptual estimates as we develop the financial plan. We'll conduct the traffic review, the environmental review, geotechnical testing. We've already issued RFPs and are ready to issue purchase orders upon board approval to get that started. We'll refine the conceptual design for the Transportation Operations Center so that we can present that to the public. And we'll continue to review those scope items that we discussed tonight. So lots to be done, but it moves fast, as you know. It seems like right now we've got a year ahead of us and lots of time, but it moves awfully quickly. And so we'll be having lots of conversation, lots of reach out, and lots of public discussion as we move forward. Does the board have any questions?
Board members? No, I guess not, Mark.
Thank you very much.
All
Tom,
right.
I'm
Thank
turning
you.
it back to you.
Mark,
Wait, Mark, did you have a question, Mark Elledge?
I was just thanking Mark.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to go back to share my screen to continue our presentations. And make sure, can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, so I just have a brief update on COVID-19. As you know, we're still closed. We're halfway through our 6th week of this closure. Just as an update, Governor Cuomo's latest executive order has closed schools through May 15th. And so that would be, I believe, a Friday. So the first return to school would be potentially May 18th. The exemption, the executive order allows for the exemption of the 180 required school days. The difference in the latest executive order is that we have an exemption from the 180 required school day requirement if and only if the schools are closed by New York State executive order. So when we first closed schools, we were under the impression, in my last report a month ago, was that schools could remain closed if the governor closed them or if our local Department of Health, Monroe County Department of Health, closed. The most updated guidance through the executive orders is that it is New York State that has the ability to keep us closed. If the state were to open our schools back up, and we decided to stay closed, we would no longer be exempt from the 180-day regulation. So there's still a lot of questions around what that means. We're still in a waiting game. You know, I half kid that if you go on social media, there's lots of people who will tell you that we're going to be closed for the rest of the school year. I am somebody who likes logic, facts, and all I know is the fact is that the governor's closed us through May 15th. So beyond that, we're in a wait and see. We're preparing for both the return and for not returning. But again, when we look at what is the logical answer, the legal answer is we are closed through May 15th. New York State Education Department has, since our last meeting a month ago on March 24th, I believe it was, we have heard from New York State Education Department. They've canceled all state assessments. Those are all the 3 through 8 math, ELA assessments, a number of other assessments that are given, science tests. And then after that, they canceled all New York State Regents exams. And information went out about this to our community, including an FAQ document from the New York State Education Department. And just know that students are really held harmless here. So if they need a Regents exam in order to graduate and they're in their 12th grade year, as long as they pass the class, they'll earn the Regents credit. We also know that the diplomas, the different types of advanced degrees and advanced diplomas that are Regents exams are used to determine them. They are all going to be granted as long as they pass the course. And so the state, actually, New York State Education Department, really, I give kudos to, because by canceling the assessments of the Regents exams, they really made sure in their FAQ, in their review, that students would be held harmless and it wouldn't negatively impact them because they can't take a Regents exam. My understanding is we're going to get more guidance from New York State Education Department because they've also received a number of questions around Regents exams. And so potentially at the next meeting, I'll provide another update on what it means that the Regents exams are canceled. We have had some updates since the March 24th board meeting. So the Penfield Central School District has shared its COVID-19 grading plan, as we're referring to it. It's been shared with families and students, and it's also on our webpage. I will give that link a little bit later in this presentation. Since March 24th, as everybody in Penfield knows, and across the state, the spring break that was scheduled was canceled by a New York State governor's executive order. And that was part of being able to remain exempt from the 180-day requirement. So spring break has come and passed. Students were still learning. Teachers were still providing work during that spring break. This is where I use quotation marks during the spring break. Sadly, but the reality is, just like the world is canceling multiple events and performances, we have to do the same thing. So most performances and events have been canceled or postponed. The 8th grade Washington trip, which is something that happens every year with our Bay Trail 8th grade students, was canceled. It wasn't postponed because once students head into 9th grade, it becomes very difficult to run a large scale, multiple night trip. And so we are working. Mr. Buddington, the principal of Bay Trail, has shared out with all of the 8th grade parents and students that parents who gave money, they wrote a check out of their own bank account to help pay for it, they are receiving a refund. And students who fundraised in order to raise money were unable to then cut those students a check. But what we are doing is that those funds that each student earned through fundraising will follow them into 9th grade. So it will help offset the cost of high school events for those students. So we do have the ability, the high school and Bay Trail work together, and we have the ability to, if John Smith raised $100 through fundraising, that would then travel with John Smith to the high school. And when high school events come up, such as dances and events, they'll be able to use that money towards those events. So, and we're still working through that process, but we want to make sure the community knows and 8th grade folks know that the hard work of fundraising for a trip and getting out there and selling those, I think it was entertainment books, that hard work won't go unnoticed, and that the funds you raise will continue to follow you through high school. They are looking, right now we're not talking about what ifs, like what could we plan, what special event we could do for those 8th graders going into 9th grade. But I do know that the high school will be having conversations, but right now is not the time to plan or anything like that. But we'll continue to work with the students to see what we can do. The other big event that we had talked a lot about, the board had heard about it when Mark Nelson, principal Harris Hill, came, was the Harris Hill's 50th celebration for 50 years of being open. That has been postponed at this point to try to bring that many people together in May. Just wasn't feasible, and we don't know how long the closures will last. We do have some questions locally that we're working on. So obviously I get a lot of emails, and I know the high school does too, around high school senior events, just a few of them: senior ball, the banquet, and of course graduation. We don't have answers to these questions yet, but we're working through that. Terry Marsh is the assistant principal for the seniors. She is working with parents and also the class council, because anything that we do, we want to make sure that we're getting input from students and families as we determine what is the best course of action for these events. Right now, nothing's been canceled, but we're really looking at when do we return to school, and if we do return to school, is it going to be a good idea to put 4,000 people together at RIT for a graduation? And we don't have answers to those yet, but we're working through that process. We're also looking very tentatively, and I'll talk about this next one on the next slide, but we're looking at least sort of what reopening of school would look like if we come back after May 15th. So if we come back May 18th, what does that look like? We're having some conversations, but really a lot of this is going to come from the governor through an executive order on what school will look like when it reopens. But we are still having conversations with principals and looking at what, if we do have to open without much guidance, what should we be doing? What should we be putting in place to make sure that our students are safe and our staff are safe? We are looking at, while we did release the COVID-19 grading plan for this time period, we are still looking at the calculation of final grade point averages, those GPAs for high school students and 8th graders who are taking high school credit-bearing courses like algebra and living environment. So we're still in a conversation and waiting for some guidance from the state on what a GPA would look like. Do we still do GPAs for this year? There's a lot of questions and not a lot of solid answers, but we just want the community to know, and obviously the board to know, that we are working on this nonstop. We had another meeting today about it. It's basically a daily conversation, reviewing what other schools are doing across the state, looking at guidance from the New York State Education Department. And obviously the last thing we want to do is harm a student academically with any plan that we have. Our focus in this district has always been social emotional learning and the development of the whole student. So we really want to make sure that whatever our plan is, it really focuses on what's best for the social emotional needs of our students. So a lot of work and conversation is going into that. We did receive some questions when we sent the grading plan out to our families and students. We created a form through Microsoft where people could ask questions, and we're finalizing an FAQ document that will be going out later this week with another update from me that just sort of tries to answer some of those frequently asked questions. And the other piece we're still needing answers to is summer school and summer programs. Our summer school is run in conjunction with BOCES. We're not sure yet. It all depends on if we're back May 18th, then summer school will probably be okay to run. If not, then we've got to determine what that looks like. Our summer programs like our math camp and our ELA and our extended school year programs, we're still planning on them, but we're also being realistic to say if the closure goes beyond into the summer, what does that look like? What can we do virtually? What can we do through an online distance platform? We want to make sure that we don't leave anybody behind with this. So I know that in the community there may be questions. There's lots of questions from staff, and a lot of this is we have more questions than answers. Sometimes we're in a little bit of a holding pattern as we wait for guidance. Just wanted to let the board and obviously the community know that we are continuing to talk about these things and making sure that our final answers and decisions really always put students first. There are some questions that we need answers to that are really out of our control completely. And Dr. Sansucci will talk a little bit about this in the budget presentation next. But we have a question of how, when and how the school budget votes will be held. Dr. Sansucci may go in a little bit further detail, but basically all we know now from an executive order is that the vote has been postponed until after July 1st. And so that would probably be July 2nd or July 9th. We're thinking, June 9th. It's postponed through June 1st. The votes can't take place until after June 1st, but it has to be the same date across the state. So we haven't heard what date that is. And then, of course, if we remain closed past into June, if the executive order extends the school closures, then the question is, how will we vote? And so, again, a lot of assumptions, but we have to take the answer from the governor's office, New York State executive order. There's conversation and discussion about, can you do an all absentee ballot? Can you push that vote further into June? And I do know in speaking with the governor's office that they are well aware of that question. They just they haven't finalized an answer yet. I know they're talking about it, thinking about it. I'm sure they're hearing from just about every superintendent, as well as superintendent organizations and the New York State School Board organization, and here locally, the Monroe County School Board Association are all reaching out. So we're hoping to get an answer soon so we can maybe sleep at night. The same thing goes along with that is the Board of Education elections. They typically go obviously on the same day, same time as the budget vote. So that still is a question. The other question we really are waiting on New York State is, when will schools open? I mentioned earlier, there's lots of assumptions. There's lots of people deciding. They're looking at Massachusetts and Pennsylvania. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it does come from an executive order from the governor. I know that there's a couple weeks ago, there was a lot of media attention on whose power is it? Is it the president's power, the governor's power? I will tell you, as a school superintendent, I'm not getting into that argument, because we know that it is the governor's executive order that tells us when we're opening, or when we're staying closed. So we're waiting for that. And hopefully, the other question we have, there will be a state-issued reopening plan. The governor's office is in conversation with superintendents across the state on what needs we have when we have to reopen. If you watch the news, you know that some parts of the state are hit much, much harder than others. Monroe County is one of those states, areas that has been hit pretty hard. Obviously, downstate New York City and the surrounding suburbs of New York City have been hit much harder than anybody else. But Monroe County per capita is in a pretty tough spot with the COVID-19 impact. And the last big question we know and has been keeping Dr. Sansucci up, I know, and myself and lots of us, is what is going to be the impact of this COVID-19 school closures and the COVID-19 response in New York State on funding. And so I won't try to steal Dr. Sansucci's thunder. I know he's very excited to talk about this in his presentation. But when we look at the budget, there are a lot of questions in terms of what should we be planning for and what will that look like in the long run. I just want to point out for the community, please, the best place to go to for information about Penfield and what Penfield is doing is our coronavirus information page, which can be found at our webpage, www.penfield.edu. If you look on the right-hand side of the page, or depending the left-hand side of the page, under quick links, you'll see right on the top COVID-19 information. And if you click there, you'll see all of our information. You'll see all of our previous communications, all the future communications from my office will be on there. They are there now, and we'll continue to provide information out to our families and our community and our students. One of the things we did, it was a great recommendation from a few parents, is we've been sending emails to the parents, and then the last email that went out around the grading plan was also sent by Mr. Buddington to all the Bay Trail students to their school emails, and to the high school through Dr. Maloney's email. And so our secondary students are getting that information. It's still going just to parents for the elementary. I don't know if kindergarten wants to sit down and read our COVID-19 grading plan. Some of them probably absolutely can, but we want to make sure that we're talking to our secondary students directly as well about things that will impact them. And that's it for my brief COVID-19 update, unless there's any questions.
Board members? Barb?
Okay. Tom, I was listening to the governor today, and he doesn't want to use the word reopen. He wants to use reimagine New York. So,
well, I appreciate that. I actually have typically watched the governor's address. I did not get a chance to do that today. And I think I've said a couple of times is every time we think we get a handle on something, there's a change and a shift. And we used to say in the beginning of this, information was coming out about the COVID-19 impact weekly, then it became daily, then it became hourly. So look, I missed one press conference and I got the word wrong, but reopen.
No, I wasn't.
I know you're teasing, but it is an example of how fast things are moving.
Well, plus he also named Bob Duffy as the person who will be overseeing the Finger Lakes region, which I'm sure you knew about that, but
I did see that. Yeah. Thank you.
So we're reimagining.
Any others? Okay, Tom, I have a question.
Sure.
Off of Barb's point about Bob Duffy being the Finger Lakes director, what I heard in that messaging was that we're going to be going region by region, and that Cuomo has acknowledged finally that different areas of the state have been hit differently. Can you see a situation where the governor says, okay, schools can open, but then Dr. Mendoza says it is not a good idea for Monroe County to be open? I mean, that's going to put us in a very sticky situation. Do you plan for that, or you're just going to wait and see? Because if we are going to be going region by region, we don't know. We might even have the leeway and the permission to do that. But I'm curious as to if there's any thought that has been given to that. Yeah,
it's a great question, and one that we've been talking about. The the superintendent group, as well as the assistant superintendents and building principals, all have county-wide conversations. So that has come up with our meetings with our superintendents in Monroe County, as well as our superintendents from our BOCES. Dan White, who is superintendent of BOCES 1, is sort of our he is our liaison directly to the governor's office, and so these conversations are being had. We have a regular update from Dr. Mendoza and sometimes Adam Bello and other political representatives to sort of share our concerns with that, because that is a real concern, is that if the state says schools are open in Monroe County, but our Dr. Mendoza, who I think the world of in terms of his response, I don't think he has stopped working. I know we're all working hard, but I can tell you that I don't know how he sleeps. I know we just got a donut at Donuts Delight too, so I'm very proud of that. But I think that will be without a doubt a concern that we have, because everything we do when we talk about schools is what's best for students and what's best for the health and safety and security of our kids. And so if there's an issue where schools are given the green light to open and the medical professionals and scientists in this area have concerns, that is a question that we have been talking about and trying to find guidance from the state on what would that mean. So right now, the executive order, it makes it pretty clear that it's only the governor who can close schools, but when that day comes, if that day comes, then it'll be a conversation we have to have.
Okay.
I don't want to see, I mean, just to be fair, but one of those things that keeps me up is while closing schools for a snow day can be a local decision, and we may close because of snow, but the school district right next door might not close because we have different needs for transportation and concerns for students and how long they have to walk. When it comes to something like this, it really has a larger impact than just opening or reimagining our schools, because our teachers and staff live in different communities. So it's a really great question, Catherine, because if Penfield says, well, we're going to open up, but the 20 parents or the 20 teachers who live in the district next door that's not opening up, that they're going to run into a very quick childcare issue.
Exactly.
And so that really is something that we've been monitoring and hoping for. It's one of those, I have a long list of questions, both figuratively and literally, and some of them are a little bit lower down because I have no control. That's one that's right in the middle of the list because we're continuing to talk about it, because that concern is one spoken about in every school district in Monroe County.
Okay. So then my guess would be that because Bob Duffy has been reaching out to business leaders, community leaders, my guess is he would be reaching out to the superintendents throughout the whole county to try to get a coordination on that, because this was just announced today, and so that's all brand new. But I'm glad to hear that you guys have already thought about that on that level, it's been addressed, at least preliminarily. Because I'm sure none of us want to be caught off guard with that and put our students, like you were saying before, in a precarious situation about, choices and how we go forward. So, and I'll bet that there are a few parents out there who have that question as well.
Absolutely. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other board member questions? Okay. Thanks, Tom.
No problem. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Dr. Sansucci for our update on the 2020-2021 budget.
Very good. Here, let me make sure I'm sharing.
You're sharing.
Can you see that? Perfect. All right. So thank you very much. Dr. Putnam provided a great segue into the budget, because at this point, budget is about COVID, I think, and about the impact on the state's finances. But I just want to spend a little bit of time and review where we've been, because things have certainly changed, and it feels like we've been in our new reality for a very, very long time. But in fact, it's really just been a relatively short time in terms of the budget cycle. So the board knows, I think the public knows, we always begin these presentations. I always begin these presentations with review of district goals because they're grounding. They're what we as a community have adopted, what we believe in, what the board has set for us as our overall lodestar, the thing we move to in difficult times and in good times as well. Academic achievement and excellence, development of partnerships, and fiscal responsibility. So, as we move through tonight's presentation, I think that there are pieces of all of this. Certainly partnerships have been important recently to all of us. I think academic achievement and excellence has been very much on folks' minds as we struggle to continue to find ways to provide instruction in very difficult circumstances. And fiscal responsibility is going to be, I think, on all of our minds as we begin to see the full impact of COVID in both the United States, the New York, and our local economy. So we began in October of 18, October 8th of 2019 with establishment of a budget calendar. And we've been moving through this process at every board meeting since then. We've carefully examined, we've looked at prior year results in terms of our audit. We've talked about our goals. We reviewed those goals. We've thought about tax cap. We've reviewed the various components of the budget as we've moved through. And at the last meeting, at the March 24th meeting, we looked at benefits, and we were in a position to begin to finalize the budget. We were looking forward to the April 1st state budget, and we knew, and we had reason to believe that we could be adopting potentially on April 21st. If we'd have stuck with our original calendar, tonight would be the board meeting at which we adopted the budget. We were closed by March 24th, if you'll recall. That was the meeting held at Town Hall, but we'd only been closed for a short time. We were uncertain, how long this was going to last, what was going to happen. But we knew that at that time, that while we were a little bit off in terms of the executive's budget providing enough funding for schools, that typically that got bumped up in negotiations. There was some money provided for just that eventuality in the governor's offer. The assembly was making noises about there not being enough funding for schools. So I think we were in a pretty comfortable place to begin to look towards the end of the process. And we were aiming, of course, for approval tonight, May 5th public hearing, and a vote on May 19th. This was the budget, the expenditure budget that we looked at that night. So with approval of the benefits budget, we were just over $103 million, about a $2.5 million budget to budget change, or about 2.6%. So that was then, and that's where we were at prior to sort of more recent events. What happened? Well, I think we all know, but I had to go back and look up the dates because this has certainly been a blur. March 7th was the first executive order. So March 7th, Executive Order 2002 declared COVID a state disaster emergency. That declaration, that executive order turns on some pretty extraordinary powers for the governor. And he turned those on March 7th. Nothing immediately happened. We were having lots of conversation. There was concern. On March 16th, County Executive Adam Bello closed Monroe County schools, and we closed. March 18th, in his fourth executive order, by then his fourth, 2002.4, the governor closed schools statewide. There have been numerous other state orders. In fact, right now we are up to Executive Order 202.21. So there have been 21 executive orders to date dealing with an awful stuff, but extending the school closure has been the subject of a couple of those. March 27th, President Trump signed the first of the stimulus bills, the CARES Act, Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act. So you may recall that's the one that extended unemployment insurance benefits. It provided some funding to municipalities to reimburse them for the costs of COVID response. And it provided some funding to schools. It was about a $2 trillion budget, $2 trillion bill, I should say, with about $13 billion or so in it for schools. That was March 27th. On March 29th, the governor canceled our vote. So, in the exact language of that, any school board, library board, or village election taking place in April or May is hereby postponed until at least June 1st, 2020, and subject to further directive as to the timing, location, or manner of voting for such elections. So essentially what this says is nothing before June 1st, and it may be not the traditional timing, location, or manner. So leaves a lot of things up in the air. That's where we're at, as Dr. Putnam mentioned, with regard to the school budget vote. We're on hold. And I'll talk about some of the consequences of that as we move forward, some of the wonderings that we're having, and some of the agenda items. At least one of the agenda items that you have tonight has to do with this. So that's March 29th. I'll roll backwards just a bit. March 27th was the CARES Act. March 29th, the governor closed school. And on April 1st, the state budget was adopted. So, you know, we've had some conversations about this previously. This all happened very quickly. New York State's budget process requires that the governor submit a budget to the legislature that they can adopt in whole, but they don't really have a line item veto. They need to negotiate changes. They can offer their own, they can increase items, and they can offer their own items, which the governor can then veto separately. But that process kind of puts the governor in a normal year in the driver's seat. And this year, he'd already submitted his budget prior to the pandemic happening. It didn't leave them lots of choices, and they didn't have lots of time. So what eventually happened was they froze foundation aid at the previous year's levels. Essentially, foundation aid for all schools in New York is the single largest category. It provides the single largest source of unrestricted funding to schools. So some aid categories, transportation aid, for example, is a reimbursement aid. You spend the money in the base year, you get the money back. We talked about that with building aid. As we do construction projects, as we buy our property, New York State provides aid back to us in the form of building aid. Foundation aid is, if you will, a grant to school district for any expenses. It's direct aid to schools, and it's been frozen. Additionally, aid was reduced for each school district by what was called a pandemic adjustment. And essentially that amount is exactly equal to, for every New York State school district, the amount that they would have received under the CARES Act. So that the CARES Act provides $341,000 to Penfield. Our pandemic adjustment reduces state support to Penfield by $341,000. So if you think about it, what does that mean? We're held harmless for this year. We're frozen in terms of an aid increase, no aid increase, but essentially $121 billion of state support to education in New York is now being provided for 1 year by that federal CARES Act funding. So that has consequences, right? We're held harmless for a year. And much of the conversation that school districts have been having, and that my peers have been having, is in terms of our planning, where do we go with this? Because we know we're okay for a year, but what happens next year? It's unlikely that there will be a second stimulus act, that New York State will receive another $1.27 billion that would make them whole, that would only get us back to a level playing field, not an increase, but just get us back to level. So it's sort of that first seed of one-shot revenue that happens in difficult budget situations. It's happening at the state level and being pushed down to schools. So that's where we're at with regard to state aid at this point. That in terms of what was adopted in the budget. However, there are other sources of concern. So future reductions are almost certain. The governor's authorized by the budget, in the budget process. Remember, they had a limited amount of time. They had limited capacity to craft, really artful kinds of bill language. This was just get in and get it done. Operating in an environment of limited information and in a crisis. So they froze aid. They implemented the pandemic adjustment, and they gave the governor the right to reduce the budget, the state budget, including support to schools, based on in 3 periods, based on 3 measurement periods. The first one comes up very quickly, April 1st through April 30th. May 1st through June 30th is the second period, so that's still in this fiscal year. Our fiscal year, of course, runs from July 1 to June 30. So 2 potential adjustments in this fiscal year, and then another one that covers the period from July 1st through December 31st. So the governor has the authority, if the budget is out of balance, if revenues underperformed by 1%, if there's a 1% out of balance expenditure side, if the budget is out of balance, the governor has the right to make budget reductions to bring it back into balance. As you know, Medicaid and aid to schools form the lion's share of the state budget. So certainly there's cause for concern here. The governor was going into, before any of this happened, before coronavirus, the state was facing about a $3 billion deficit. That grew. The comptroller estimated that could grow to as much as $7 billion early in this process. And right now the governor estimates that they're about $10 billion out of whack. So we don't know yet what will happen in those measurement periods, but I think that it may not be, well, we'll see. We'll see, but certainly the potential for it to not be good is there. How that will play out, what that will look like, how it will be distributed, we don't know. The governor has said a variety of things. The day before yesterday, so over the weekend, he mentioned that it might be necessary to cut as much as half of the aid that is provided to schools. That would actually take care of the entire deficit solely on schools. And by yesterday's conversation, by yesterday's presentation, his 11:30 public address, he was talking about 20% across the board cuts. I think it's fair to say that there's some campaigning going on there, because the federal government is also negotiating another federal stimulus. The governor has been a strong proponent as part of the Governors Association as well, with saying, hey, you have to help us out here. We need some funding. So it's hard to say how we're getting pulled into all of that conversation. But there is no doubt that the state's budget is in dire straits for a number of reasons, and the governor has tools at his availability to help address some of that, perhaps at our expense. So we're in balance for now. We have made changes to the budget to address the new shortfall. We've included the $341,000 federal stimulus package. It's still unclear. I haven't seen clear guidance yet as to how that's to be treated in our budget. That's sort of an accounting fashion, whether it's a grant or whether we include it in the general fund. My belief is that we will include it in the general fund, so we're recognizing it there as revenue. That will offset and get us back to no increase the pandemic adjustment. We've eliminated our planned transfer to capital reserve. We'd included as part of our long-term planning process some transfers to reserve, so we've eliminated those. I have decreased the general fund share and increased the revenue appropriation for bus purchases by $80,000. That gets us back to flat. So that leaves us flat year over year for with no increase for the general fund share of bus purchase. We're still buying buses. We still propose to move forward with that, but we've increased the amount of the bill, if you will, that is being paid for from our bus purchase reserve. And I've also reduced our estimated sales tax revenue by $200,000 from about 3.8 to 3.6 $1 million. I think it's fair to say that sales tax receipts will be down. And so we're trying to recognize that to plan for. We'll need to make more judgments about that as we move further on. Again, this whole budget remains incomplete. We're in balance with these changes. We made some other minor changes, but those are essentially the significant ones. Those changes bring us back into balance at a 1.9% budget to budget, about $1.26 million, about $1.9 million increase. So we're under 2%. That's, you can see the state aid is essentially flat at a 0.89% increase. Other local revenue goes down, mostly because of the change in sales tax revenue. And with that, we are at our cap of 2.66%. So we're under the cap, we balance, but we're not done yet. So more to come. We have upcoming dates, upcoming board meetings where we'll need to continue to address this. So this was the calendar. April 20th was our deadline for petitions. April 21st, approve and adopt. May 5th, May 15th, all out the window. We're waiting for the vote. We're waiting at this point for the governor to release guidance around a next vote. We'll be paying attention to those April 30th reductions. We don't know what the outlines or what the final result of that second federal stimulus bill will be. Will it meaningfully bail out the finances of New York State? Will that flow through the schools? Will it have an impact here? You know, what will it be restricted to cover? We just don't know any of that at this point. We don't know the vote date. And once there is a vote date, we don't know whether that vote will be held in person, by paper ballot, by some other means. We just, at this point, that's information we don't have, and we don't know the extent of further reduction. So we remain in flux. On your agenda tonight, we've made some recommendations. There is an agenda item tonight that will change some of the vote dates. So we are adding a vote date, a second vote date in June, and we are moving the March vote, I'm sorry, the May 5th vote date to May 12th. The reason—
Mark, actually, I'm just sorry, just to verify, we're not changing vote dates, we're changing—
Oh, I'm sorry, I said vote dates, and I sincerely apologize. Board meeting dates.
We were all with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, let me correct that. There is an agenda item to change board meeting dates, moving the 5th to, I was saying vote, got stuck, to May 12th. The reason for that was to align our remaining budget, our remaining board meetings with a potential June 9th vote. The reason that I have thought, and the reason that we're tentatively planning around that, in the absence of any other information, is that a June 9th board meeting date provides for a revote date for failed state budgets on June 30th. And it just seems like it can't go much later than that. So Having said that, that's all based on existing law and regulation around advertising deadlines, posting requirements and so forth. And I believe that the governor has the authority to change, waive, eliminate much of that. So, we're making plans in the absence of any other information and trying to provide as much flexibility as we possibly can and provide as much opportunity for us to communicate with the public and with each other and to take action as we move through this. So that's where we're at with regard to the budget unknowns. There's some future considerations for long-range planning that I think we need to talk about based on what we see in the economy at this point. As you know, the tax cap isn't really a cap, but it's effectively functioned as one, and it is based on the lower of inflation or 2%. That's why we call it the 2% tax cap. It's the lower, though, of inflation or 2%. I think that there's a strong possibility that next year's cap could be close to zero. We don't know what the condition of New York's budget is going to be in future years. It's New York State's budget strongly dependent on income from Wall Street. That, while the market's recovering a little bit, it certainly is not what it once was. And so that provides some source for concern. It's unlikely, even if there is a federal stimulus, a second federal stimulus, that there's one year over year over year. So New York's budget needs to come back into balance and needs to get healthy in order for us to work through this as a state. That's probably going to take some time. And we also know it's that double-edged sword when New York State economy, when the stock market falters, New York State's economy falters, and when that happens, returns on the investments in the retirement system go down and increased costs come to the school in the form of retirement system costs. So, it's always difficult to read tea leaves and to project the future, but it certainly is cause for concern. I think that Penfield has always had a goal. This is our financial goal looking back to when we started this process in sunnier times, that our budget development had to reflect current fiscal realities and balance the needs of students, maintain programs and facilities, and minimize impact on taxpayers. Nothing's changed about that. Certainly the financial circumstances of the state have changed. We have cause for concern. I think we're paying attention to that. We're trying to be planful and thoughtful as we prepare for next steps. But I don't think that goal needs to change at all. I also don't think our goal around long-range planning should change. We're already looking at uses by New York State of one-shot revenues. That will be a consideration as we move along. How can we lean on reserves to get us through hard times is one of the things they're for. We just need to be careful to do it prudently, to do it in a way that makes sense, to do it in a way that doesn't jeopardize us in the future, and can help us manage through some difficult budget times. So that's where we're at. I feel like I'm saying over and over again, I don't know a lot of things, but frankly, we don't. We're in a holding pattern, waiting on guidance. I think in the very near future, we'll understand what the governor intends to do at the end of April. I'm hopeful that information comes quickly. The way the legislation is written is the governor has a right to propose a plan. He proposes a plan. I believe, I don't have any inside information, but I believe he's prepared to propose one and quickly. The state legislature then has 10 days to consider it, to propose a plan of their own, and to pass it essentially by both houses of the legislature. So they can override him. This is an election year for them, and I think their stomach for that may not be strong. So we'll see what happens. But I would expect the 10 days to elapse. sort of further eroding the clock. So we'll know more. We'll know more about what's going to happen after the 30th, and we'll be having further conversations with both the board and the public as we move on. Are there any questions?
Yeah, Mark,
Yes.
I have one question about when you talked about the 3 time periods where he's going to evaluate the budget and the economy and revenue and then make adjustments. 2 of those time periods were in this fiscal year. Do you see that that impacts basically revenue and reimbursements for this fiscal year?
You know, I don't know. I think it's very interesting that they chose, you know, they wrote those time periods, they chose those time periods for the bill with intent. I don't know whether they intend, and so I think it provides the possibility for them to say, we're reducing this year state aid that comes to this year. Having said that, though, state aid's established as part of the budget. State aid levels are established as part of the budget, and that budget was approved last April without this language. So I'm not enough of an analyst or attorney to really understand those choices. I know that school boards has been pretty clear that they would prefer that if there are to be cuts, if there are to be reductions, for the governor to make them for next year, obviously, and as soon as possible. Because the longer you move through a school year, the less opportunity you have to make adjustments. I mean, it's, you know, whatever you have to do, you know, it gets harder as time gets shorter. So school boards have said, hey, if it has to be April 30th, better than later, better than June 30th, better June 30th than cuts on December 31st. Because, you know, you once you've set class sizes, once you're in the middle of the school year, you know, what are we going to do to make change then? So I believe personally that they will be cuts for this upcoming school year. And I think we'll get an early warning. Well, I think we'll not early warning. We will understand better what those will be as of that first measurement period.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mark.
Board members, any other questions? Well, as always, Mark, I think this is a great presentation given all the variables and the unknowns and the uncertainties. And, you know, you've made adjustments and you've prepared for, you know, for the future as best as you can under the circumstances. I think this was a great presentation. I appreciate all your efforts and all the time you put into it and taking the time to explain something. So it's really kind of complicated, even though, you know, there's, you know, it's easy enough to say this is uncertain when we're not sure and I don't know. But you've really kind of explained quite a bit of this for all those unknowns, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.
Right, Tom, I'm turning it back over to you.
Great. This is where I get to say that concludes superintendent reports.
And this is where I get to say thank you, Dr. Putnam.
Wonderful.
Okay. All right, board members, we are on financial items. Okay. Notice of annual meeting, budget vote, and election. The next agenda item is approval of the notice of annual meeting, budget vote, and election. We have previously approved this language, however. The scheduled vote date of May 19th has been canceled by the governor. Accordingly, the May 5th public budget hearing is also canceled. This agenda item readopts the previous language and authorizes the superintendents of schools to fill in any necessary dates and to publish the notice as soon as possible upon guidance by the governor. The only change from the previous resolution is the bus purchase proposition. The general fund portion of this proposition has been reduced by $80,000 as explained by Dr. Sansucci. I will now read the revised proposition. Resolved that the Board of Education of the Penfield Central School District is hereby authorized to purchase 6 66-passenger type school buses and 1 30-passenger type school buses, and to expend from the capital fund, therefore, a sum not exceeding $824,546, with $480,000 of such cost to be appropriated and expended from the 2020-21 general fund budget, and to appropriate and expend the balance not to exceed $344,546 from the 2017 School Bus Reserve Fund established pursuant to Section 3651 of the Education Law. May I have a motion and a second for approval of the annual notice and authorization of the superintendent to make any necessary revisions as stated in the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Sharon?
All in favor, none opposed, motion carries.
Thank you.
Upstairs, Maya.
Okay. All right. Readopt 403B retirement plan. The IRS has recently adopted changes to the regulations governing the district's 403B retirement plan. These changes impact the eligibility of part-time employees and hardship distributions. OMNI, the district's independent third-party administrator, has provided amended language for the district's plan. This resolution approves the adoption of the amended language and readopts the entire plan. Resolved that the Board of Education approves the attached hardship and eligibility amendments effective March 26, 2020, and readopts the district's 403B retirement plan pursuant to the attached adoption agreement. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay.
All in favor, none opposed, motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Land purchase. Resolution, excuse me. Resolution approving purchase contract. Whereas the Board of Education seeks to purchase real property known in the town of Penfield, County of Monroe, and State of New York, consisting of approximately 40.1 plus or minus acres known as 1364 Jackson Road, Webster, New York, 14580, and being a portion of tax map number 095.03135 at a cost of $802,000 for school district purposes. And whereas the Board of Education has received and reviewed the real estate purchase and sale contract for the purchase of the property. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Board of Education of the Penfield Central School District as follows. Section 1, the contract to purchase approximately 40.1 plus or minus acres of property at 1364 Jackson Road in the town of Penfield, County of Monroe, and State of New York at a price of $802,000 and upon other terms and conditions set forth therein, is hereby approved, subject to authorization by the district's qualified voters. Section 2, the superintendent is authorized to execute the purchase contract and the board president is authorized to execute all transfer documents and take all steps necessary to complete the conveyance. Section 3, this resolution shall take effect immediately. May I have a motion and a second that the board approve the foregoing resolution?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any?
All in favor, none opposed,
Okay, thank
motion
you.
carries.
Thank you. 2021, item 6A here. 2021 Capital Improvement Project, seeker intent to declare lead agency status. The board has just approved a purchase offer for 40 acres of property at 1364 Jackson Road for a district transportation operations center. The district is also considering various repairs and renovations at the district's buildings based upon the building condition survey. Approval of this project and of the land purchase will require a public vote, which has not yet been scheduled. The resolution is a preliminary step in the process. It authorizes the district administration to notify other government agencies regarding the possibility of a project and to determine if they would want to be the lead agency in any future state environmental quality review actions. May I have a motion and a second for approval of the resolution declaring the board's intent to be lead agency for this project as stated in the agenda?
So moved.
Second, please. Can I have a second?
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed?
All in favor and unopposed, motion carries.
Thank you. Okay. Hold on, folks. I'm getting there. Okay. Monroe 1 BOCES annual election and budget vote. The following candidates have been nominated by their respective boards for positions as members of the BOCES board. It has been past practice for component boards of education to endorse the candidate nominated by the Board of Education whose seat is up for election. Seat number 1, resolved to cast one vote for the election of Lisa Lattin, resident of Penfield Central School District, as a member of the Monroe 1 BOCES board for a term of office which will begin on July 1, 2020 and end June 30th, 2023. Seat number 2, resolved to cast one vote for the election of Christine DeTurk, resident of the Honey Falls Lima Central School District, as a member of the Monroe 1 BOCES board for a term of office which will begin on July 1, 2020 and end on June 30th, 2023. Seat number 3, resolved to cast one vote for the election of Kim McCluskey, resident of the Pittsford Central School District, as a member of the Monroe 1 BOCES board for a term of office which will begin on April 23rd, 2020 and end on June 30th, 2022. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed?
All in favor and unopposed, motion carries.
Thank you. BOCES administrative budget vote. May I have a motion and a second that the Board of Education approves the proposed BOCES administrative budget in the amount of $5,618,285 for the 2020-2021 fiscal year?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor?
All are in favor, none opposed, motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, under President's remarks. Mark Sansucci did a great job explaining about our Board of Education meetings and the upcoming vote and all that. And on your agenda, we have a list of Board of Education meetings, ones that have been canceled and ones for possible budget hearing. May I have a motion and a second that the remainder of the 2019-2020 Board of Education meetings be revised as listed?
So
So
moved.
moved. Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any
All
opposed?
are in favor, none opposed, motion carries.
Thank you. All right, Board of Education meeting schedule. Okay, we have the recommended action that the 2020-2021 Board of Education meeting schedule be approved as listed. Meetings are generally held on Tuesdays at 7:00 p.m. in the Penfield High School Library unless otherwise noted. Special meetings will be scheduled as required. May I have a motion and a second that the 2020-2021 Board of Education meeting schedule be approved as listed?
So moved.
Second.
Oh, okay, thanks, Mark. Any questions or comments? All
Could I
those,
just get who seconded that? I'm sorry.
Mark Elledge did the second?
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All those in favor?
All are in favor, none opposed.
All
Motion
right,
carries.
thank you. Okay, meet the candidates night. The April 27th, 2020 Meet the Candidates Night is postponed due to the COVID-19 school closure. A new date is to be determined. And that's all the information I have on that. All right. And there being no other business, may I have a motion and a second that the meeting be adjourned at 8:48 p.m.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor?
All are in favor, none opposed, motion carried. Meeting is
All right.
adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Sharon.
You're
Yeah.
welcome.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you, Sharon.